Chapter 11. Valinor's Good Influence on Bad People. They walked on for a while more. Haldir guessed it to be around noon when he could finally see some change to the scenery as the trees became less dense. In the distance, slightly to the right, there was another city as large as Tyrion, not condensed upon a hill, but spread throughout the valley. As before, it emanated a certain glow, only he could tell that here it was greater, even though it was still a ways away.
Valmar,
Elhith said, noticing what Haldir was looking at.
the city of the Valar. We'll be there in 20 minutes, I'd say, at the pace we're going now.
What will we do when we get there?
Well, Terendul and Vanimo were the escorts, so they will bring him before the Valar in Mahanaxar.
That is where Morgoth was sentenced, wasn't it?
Haldir asked. Sauron visibly spazzed at his words, but did not stop.
Yes, the Ring of Doom.
Did you hear that, Sauron?
Haldir thought to himself as loudly as he could, hoping that Sauron would have no other choice but to listen.
You just can't seem to get away from those darn rings of doom, can you?
After a mental sound of irritation, Sauron responded.
Do you remember what I said to you earlier?
Vaguely. Something about head smashing and getting annoyed.
Yes. Well, this would be one of those times when it would be wise not to try to intentionally provoke me.
Are you stressed, Sauron?
Haldir asked.
Frankly, yes, a bit. What was your first clue?
Just an educated guess.
Well, just as a hint, give me a bubble that's like 20 feet wide after this. It would be to your benefit.
Well, if it benefits me.
He stopped there, and Sauron did not make any reply, which Haldir was glad of. Soon Haldir was able to tell that they were going downwards, and the glow ahead of them became obscured by the hills. There were other signs that made it apparent that they were close. The path ahead changed from short grass to perfectly laid stone, and then to gold. Terendul and Vanimo, as Elhith has called them, stopped here and tidied themselves up a bit, pulling their cloaks about them in a more formal fashion.
Is there anything I should be doing?
Haldir asked when even Elhith brushed his tunic.
No, I do not think that you will be called to go before them, so there is no need today. Had you been, you probably would have had time to get cleaned up. They must, though, since they will be going in.
During all this, Sauron stood impatiently a little ahead, folding up the gray blanket that he had held around him all this time until now. He still looked a bit damp. His hem dripped a few forlorn drops to emphasize the point. Frowning at the two elves who were tugging at their tunics and yanking on their cloaks, he sighed.
I am just going to go on alone if you two don't hurry up.
The elves looked at him with surprise.
You can't go ahead of us,
one said matter-of-factly while sitting on the ground relacing his boots. Sauron leaned forward and then whispered,
Watch me.
With that, he turned about and continued down the path. After a couple steps, however, he paused and faced them again.
I had a thought. Catch, Haldir.
He tossed the blanket to Haldir, who reflexively held out his hands, instantly regretting it as the blanket was soaking.
Can't be going to a trial holding a blanket,
he said steadily, although it was apparent that the thought discomforted him. By the time he was walking again, the other elves had finished and were hurrying to catch up with him, not looking at all pleased, which, Haldir reflected, was probably Sauron's point in doing it. It was only a few minutes afterward that the hills suddenly spread apart, the plain opening up before them. At first it seemed that there was nothing different, but then Haldir became aware of something that could not be seen, but was felt, which made it seem even grander. Everything was flooded with a bright golden light that could not be completely attributed to the sun. They continued on, not even allowing Haldir a moment to try and soak it in. He thought that was very unfair, as he hadn't been in such a place before like the others had. Although he didn't know how long Sauron had been good, and thus couldn't really assume that he had been there, Haldir figured that Sauron couldn't really care less. There were tons of people everywhere. However, they seemed to be out simply on everyday errands. Haldir was very glad of that, thinking that if people were able to connect him to Sauron, that it might make it a bit hard to fit in. A couple people greeted Elhith. However, none spoke a word to Terendul or Vanimo. Haldir figured that it must have been some unspoken rule that they, obviously on business, were not to be bothered. The road suddenly became more broad ahead, passing under an arch in the wall and disappearing into whatever lay beyond. Haldir was all ready to go on, but they stopped. One of the other elves, Haldir was still unsure as to which one was which, spoke to Elhith in the same tongue used before, irritating Haldir quite a bit. He knew that they could speak his language. They had spoken it earlier. He rolled his eyes, wondering what they felt they couldn't share with him.
He says that Elhith is to bring you to the house that you will have here, and that we will be going on ahead.
Haldir looked up at Sauron with surprise.
Thanks,
He thought, a bit baffled.
Any time. Well, not any time. In fact, that was probably just an isolated incident, and you shouldn't expect anything like it to happen again.
Haldir kept himself from smiling for once. Sauron looked about ready to slap himself for having said something helpful. However, he did not get the opportunity, as it seemed that all the information had been given. The elves started towards the arch, pushing Sauron forward along with them. Elhith turned to Haldir and smiled.
Well, that's taken care of now. Would you like to see where you will be living?
Haldir nodded slowly, and they turned down a street on the left, leaving the busy road.